The poor Apache woman pleaded, "I'm freezing, let me in, I'll reward you." Snow had begun to fall in the early hours of the morning, turning the dry earth into a frozen white carpet. The wind howled through the sparse trees, bending their branches and scattering flakes across the rugged landscape. Life in the settlement had always been difficult, but the harshness of this particular winter seemed almost cruel, testing the strength of every person and animal that tried to survive in its path. John, a rancher who had spent most of his life tending to his small herd of cattle, trudged along the narrow trail leading back to his cabin. His boots sank into the thickening snow with each step, and his breath formed clouds that quickly vanished into the cold morning air. His face, weathered by years of sun and wind, was tense, and his hands were red and numb despite the thick gloves he wore. The day had been long, filled with the usual tasks of checking fences, feeding the animals, and making sure none of his cattle had wandered off. But the journey home through the deepening snow was proving to be almost as exhausting as the work on the ranch itself. As he walked, he noticed something unusual ahead, a shadow barely visible against the whiteness of the snow. At first he thought it was a tree or perhaps a large rock, but as he drew closer, he realized it was a person. A woman, thin and shivering, was crouched near the edge of the trail, her small figure almost swallowed by the snow around her. Her clothing was torn and soaked through, offering little protection against the biting cold. The sight made John pause. He had seen many travelers struggle through the harsh terrain over the years, but something about this woman struck him differently. She looked up at him with wide, pleading eyes, her lips trembling as she spoke. "Please, I'm freezing. Let me in, I'll reward you." Her voice was quiet but carried an urgency that made him stop in his tracks. She seemed so small and fragile, yet there was a strength in her gaze that spoke of endurance and survival. John felt a pang of uncertainty. In these parts, travelers were rare, and strangers, especially from the Apache tribes, were often met with suspicion. Stories of raids and conflicts between settlers and tribes were still fresh in the minds of many, including his own. His instincts warned him to be cautious, but the desperation in her voice made it hard to ignore the human suffering before him. John's mind raced. He could turn away, leave her to the merciless cold, and return to the safety of his cabin. He could tell himself that it was too risky, that helping her might bring danger to his home and family. But something deeper stirred within him, a sense of compassion that outweighed fear. He remembered his mother's words from years ago, when she had told him that kindness, even in small measures, was a gift worth giving. The woman's teeth chattered visibly, and her arms wrapped around herself in a futile attempt to keep warm. He could see the frost forming on her dark hair, and the sight sent a shiver down his own spine. After a long pause, John finally spoke, his voice firm but gentle. "All right, come with me. You can warm yourself inside." The woman's eyes lit up with a mixture of relief and gratitude. She nodded quickly, not trusting her voice, and began to follow him carefully. Each step she took was slow, as though the cold had locked her muscles in place, making every movement a struggle. John reached out a hand to steady her when she stumbled, and she accepted it without hesitation. There was an unspoken understanding between them, a fragile bond formed in the midst of hardship and snow. The cabin was a modest structure, built from rough-hewn logs with a stone chimney that curled smoke into the gray sky. Inside, the warmth was a sharp contrast to the freezing air outside. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting golden light across the room. John removed his wet gloves and hung his coat near the door, motioning for the woman to sit near the fire. She lowered herself onto a small wooden stool, her body shaking uncontrollably as the warmth began to seep into her frozen limbs. She wrapped her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders, trying to hold on to whatever small comfort she could find. John busied himself by taking a kettle from the shelf, filling it with water and placing it on the stove to heat. He found a small loaf of bread and some cheese and set them on the table. "Here," he said quietly, "eat something. You need your strength." The woman looked at the food with wide, wary eyes as if it were a treasure. She took a small piece of bread and nibbled at it carefully, savoring each bite. John watched her, noticing the dirt and frost in her hair and on her face, and realized how little this woman must have had in the days leading up to this moment. Slowly, she began to speak, her voice still trembling. thank you so much," she whispered. I didn't think anyone would help me." John nodded, saying nothing, giving her space to recover. He could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the way her shoulders sagged with the weight of the cold and hunger she had endured. She was small, yet her presence seemed to carry a story, a history that had led her to this moment, pleading for shelter from a stranger. As she ate and sipped the warm water John had offered, he began to notice small details that told him more about her than words ever could. Her fingers were calloused and rough, showing a life of labor and survival. Her eyes, dark and deep, reflected intelligence and resilience tempered by hardship. John felt a strange mixture of awe and respect. He had not only saved her from the cold, but had also unknowingly encountered a person whose life had been shaped by challenges he could hardly imagine. The wind outside continued to howl, rattling the logs of the cabin, but inside there was a fragile peace. John tended the fire, adding logs to keep the warmth steady, while the woman slowly began to regain some color in her cheeks. She looked at him with gratitude, but also with a quiet dignity, as if she did not want to appear weak despite the circumstances. It was clear to John that she had faced far worse than a winter night alone in the wilderness, and yet she had survived, finding him when she needed help most. Hours passed, and the storm outside grew fiercer. The snow piled higher, covering the ground in a thick, unbroken sheet of white. John knew that leaving the cabin now would be dangerous, and he was glad the woman was safely inside. They spoke little, exchanging words here and there, but much of the communication was in silence. He could sense her story in the way she held herself, in the careful movements of her hands, and in the steady, quiet way she observed him. It was a story of survival, resilience, and a determination to endure against all odds. Night fell and the cabin was bathed in the golden glow of the fire. The woman, finally somewhat warmed, leaned back and allowed herself a rare moment of rest. John sat across from her, quietly observing, feeling a mixture of relief and curiosity. He wondered where she had come from, what dangers she had faced, and how she had survived alone in such harsh conditions. But he did not press her for answers. Some stories, he realized, could not be hurried. They needed patience and trust, and he was willing to give both. Before retiring for the night, John brought over a blanket for her, covering her shoulders with care. She looked up at him and whispered a simple, heartfelt, "Thank you." There were no promises of reward in her tone, only sincerity. John nodded, feeling an unfamiliar warmth in his chest. It was the warmth that comes from helping someone in need, from knowing that a small act of kindness can make a life-changing difference. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the cabin, two lives had intersected in a moment of humanity. The world beyond the walls was still harsh and unrelenting, but within the cabin there was safety, warmth, and a fragile bond that had begun to form. John knew that the night would be long and the storm might not end soon, but he felt a quiet satisfaction. He had chosen to help, and in doing so, he had found a connection that transcended fear, prejudice, and hardship. The woman's story, he sensed, was far from over, and he could see that in her eyes. There was more she had endured than he could guess, and perhaps more she had to teach. But for now, in this simple cabin, in the midst of a harsh winter, they had found a moment of peace. The snow continued to fall, covering the land in white, but inside, the warmth of human kindness burned brighter than any fire. And so, the night stretched on. John watched the fire, listening to the wind outside and the quiet breathing of the woman resting nearby. He understood even then that this encounter would stay with him forever, a reminder that courage and compassion often meet in the unlikeliest of places. In the cold and isolation of the winter wilderness, a small act of kindness had created a spark, one that would illuminate both their lives in ways neither could yet imagine. The first light of dawn crept through the small cabin window, casting soft golden streaks across the wooden floor. Outside, the snow had stopped falling, but the land was still buried under a thick, unbroken blanket of white. The air was crisp, and the trees were heavy with frost, their branches sparkling in the morning sun. Inside the cabin, John stirred awake, the fire having dwindled to glowing embers overnight. He could hear the woman shifting on her blanket, trying to get comfortable without disturbing him. John sat up, rubbing his tired eyes. He had barely slept, not because of discomfort, but because his mind was busy turning over the events of the previous night. He had never expected to encounter someone in such dire need, and he found himself thinking about the risks he had taken by helping her. Yet more than fear, he felt a growing sense of curiosity and concern. Who was this woman? Where had she come from? And why had she been out in the snow, alone and freezing on the edge of the settlement? The woman stirred and looked up at him with tired, grateful eyes. "Good morning," she whispered, her voice soft and slightly hoarse from the cold. John nodded in return. He realized that she must have been walking for days in the harsh winter, surviving on whatever little food and warmth she could find. Despite her fragile appearance, there was a quiet strength in her that fascinated him. It was the kind of resilience that only comes from living through hardships most people could not imagine. John moved to the small stove and added a few logs to revive the fire. Soon, warmth filled the cabin once more, and the woman instinctively drew closer to it. She wrapped her thin shawl around herself as she watched him work, her eyes following every movement. She had been quiet most of the night, as if conserving her energy, and John realized that she must have been exhausted from the journey, both physically and emotionally. "I'm sorry I had to ask for help like that," she said finally, her voice steadying as she spoke. "But I had nowhere else to go." John shook his head. "There's no need to apologize," he said gently. "No one should be out in the snow like that alone. You did what you had to do to survive." His words seemed to calm her, and she gave a small nod, appreciating the understanding rather than the pity. As the morning progressed, they began to talk, slowly at first. John asked simple questions, careful not to startle or offend her. "Where were you coming from?" he asked. She hesitated, glancing down at her hands. I've been moving from place to place," she replied. "I'm alone now, my family, they are far away. I had to find food, warmth, a place to stay for the night." Her words were simple, but the weight behind them told of a life filled with struggle and loss. John listened, his heart growing heavier as he realized just how much this woman had endured. She had survived the wilderness alone, facing the dangers of the cold, hunger, and isolation. Her determination to live, to keep moving despite the challenges, impressed him deeply. It was clear that she had a strong spirit, one that refused to be broken by circumstance. In that moment, John felt a mixture of respect, admiration, and empathy. For his part, John began to share small parts of his own life. He spoke of his ranch, the cattle he tended, and the long days spent maintaining fences and feeding animals. Though he knew his life was hard, it had never tested him in the same way the woman's life had. She listened quietly, nodding occasionally, her eyes reflecting both understanding and curiosity. There was a gentle rhythm to their conversation, a delicate balance of storytelling and listening that slowly built trust between them. Breakfast was a quiet affair. John had prepared a simple meal of bread, cheese, and warm tea, which the woman accepted with gratitude. She ate slowly, savoring each bite as though it had been a rare luxury. John noticed how careful she was, how even in her hunger she maintained a certain dignity. It reminded him that survival was not just about filling the stomach. It was also about maintaining the spirit, staying true to oneself despite adversity. After breakfast, John cleared a small space near the fire where the woman could sit and rest while he tended to his chores. He stepped outside briefly, checking on the cattle and the fences, making sure nothing had been damaged by the storm. The snow was still deep, and the cold made every movement an effort, but he knew the animals needed attention. When he returned inside, he found the woman quietly observing the snow-covered landscape through the window. She seemed lost in thought, her gaze distant, as if the memory of the journey that had brought her here was still vivid in her mind. "You've been through a lot," John said softly, not wanting to startle her. She turned to him, a faint smile appearing on her lips. "I have," she admitted, "but I've also learned a lot. I've learned how to survive, how to find water, how to stay safe, even when it feels impossible." Her words carried a quiet wisdom, the kind that only comes from facing the world alone and overcoming its challenges. John felt a sense of admiration for her courage, realizing that she had endured hardships far greater than he could imagine. As the day went on, John became more comfortable with her presence. He moved around the cabin, preparing a warm stew from the small supplies he had, while she helped in small ways, gathering firewood, sweeping the floor, and arranging blankets. There was a quiet rhythm to their work, a sense of shared purpose that neither had expected. Despite their differences, they found common ground in the simple acts of survival and care. By mid-afternoon, the woman had regained some of her strength. She moved more confidently, her shivering less frequent, and her eyes brighter. She began to speak more freely about her journey, sharing stories of traveling through forests, crossing rivers and finding shelter wherever she could. John listened intently, fascinated by her resilience and resourcefulness. Each story revealed a new layer of her character, her intelligence, her courage, and her ability to adapt to even the most difficult circumstances. Yet beneath her calm exterior, John sensed that there was more she had not shared. Something in her eyes hinted at secrets, experiences too painful or dangerous to recount fully. He respected her silence, understanding that trust could not be rushed. In the quiet moments between stories, he observed her carefully, noticing the small details, the calluses on her hands, the careful way she moved, and the intensity in her gaze. These details told a story of survival that words alone could not convey. As evening approached, the light outside dimmed, and the cabin grew warm and cozy from the fire John had maintained. They sat together near the hearth, the woman finally allowing herself to relax completely. She shared small bits of her culture, the traditions and knowledge she had learned from her people, and John found himself captivated by her words. He realized that she carried not just the experiences of survival, but also the wisdom of generations. The knowledge she possessed about the land, the weather, and natural remedies was remarkable, and he could see how valuable it could be to anyone willing to listen and learn. John asked her cautiously, "Do you have family? Anyone waiting for you?" She shook her head. "No, not really," she replied. "They are far away. I've been on my own for some time, but I hope to find them one day." Her voice was calm, but there was a quiet longing in it, a hope that she might be reunited with her loved ones someday. John felt a pang of sympathy, imagining the loneliness she must have endured, moving from place to place without the comfort of family or community. Night fell, and the cabin grew quiet. The woman prepared her blanket near the fire once again, and John made sure she was comfortable before he retired to his own corner. Before sleep claimed them both, she turned to him and said softly, "Thank you for helping me. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't." John nodded, feeling a warmth that had little to do with the fire. "You would have survived somehow," he said gently. "But I'm glad I could help tonight." Her eyes held a mixture of gratitude and understanding, and for a moment, neither spoke, content in the quiet companionship they had found in the harsh wilderness. The night stretched on, and though the wind still howled outside, the cabin remained a sanctuary. Inside, there was warmth, safety, and the beginnings of trust between two people who had started as strangers. John realized that helping her was not just an act of kindness. It was an opportunity to connect, to understand another human being in a world that often seemed cold and indifferent. The woman, in turn, felt a sense of relief and security she had not experienced in a long time. For both of them, the night had changed something fundamental. As John drifted into a light sleep, he knew that the story of this encounter was far from over. The woman had arrived in his life unexpectedly, but her presence had already left a mark. He would never forget the look in her eyes that first night, the pleading that had turned into quiet gratitude, and the strength she displayed despite her vulnerability. And he sensed that she, too, would remember him, not just for the warmth of his cabin, but for the compassion he had shown when it mattered most. Outside, the snow-covered mountains glistened under the pale moonlight, silent witnesses to the meeting of two very different lives. The storm had passed, but its memory lingered, a reminder of the dangers and challenges that life could present. Yet, inside the cabin, there was hope, resilience, and the beginning of a bond that neither distance nor hardship could easily break. In the stillness of that winter night, two strangers had found each other, and in doing so had discovered the power of trust, courage, and kindness. The following morning brought a soft stillness to the settlement. The snow had settled into smooth, glittering sheets that stretched as far as the eye could see. The wind had calmed, leaving only the faint rustle of frost-laden trees and the occasional cry of a distant bird. Inside the cabin, John stirred awake, feeling the warmth of the fire and the comforting presence of the woman nearby. She was already awake, quietly moving around the small cabin, tending to the blankets and preparing for the day. John watched her for a moment, noticing the careful, deliberate way she moved. Each gesture, though simple, carried a sense of purpose and patience. He realized that this woman had lived her life in constant vigilance, learning to navigate dangers and uncertainties with skill and quiet determination. There was something in her eyes that spoke of deep wisdom, of experiences far beyond the ordinary challenges of daily life. Though young in appearance, she seemed older in spirit, shaped by trials that had forced her to grow stronger than most people ever had to. "Good morning," John said, breaking the silence. She looked up and smiled faintly. "Good morning," she replied softly. There was a peaceful rhythm in their exchange, simple and unassuming, yet filled with an unspoken understanding. Over the past day, a fragile bond had begun to grow between them, built on trust, shared experience, and the quiet acknowledgement of one another's humanity. John prepared a simple breakfast while she watched. The warmth of the fire and the smell of cooking food seemed to lift her spirits. She ate slowly, taking care to savor each bite, and John could see how much she appreciated the simple meal. Her gratitude was quiet but profound, expressed not through words alone, but in the way she carried herself, in the careful movements of her hands, and in the soft glances she cast toward him. It was a subtle reminder to John that kindness, no matter how small, could touch a life deeply. After breakfast, the woman spoke for the first time about her journey in more detail. "I've been traveling for a long time," she said quietly. "I lost my family when I was very young, and since then I've had to survive on my own. I've learned where to find water, how to hunt small animals, how to keep warm in the snow. Life has been hard, but I've learned to endure." John listened intently, captivated by her words. Her voice was calm, but beneath it lay the weight of years of struggle, of nights spent alone and cold, of days filled with uncertainty and danger. He asked gently, "Did you have anyone to guide you? Anyone to teach you these things?" She shook her head. "No," she said. "I learned from watching, from trial and error. Sometimes I failed, but I survived. That's what matters." John felt a deep admiration for her resilience. It was one thing to endure hardship for a short time, but to spend a lifetime navigating the world alone, constantly testing one's limits and learning from every experience. That required a courage and strength he could barely comprehend. As the day went on, they moved beyond survival and began to share stories of life in a gentler tone. John spoke of his family, of the small joys that came with tending to his cattle and maintaining the ranch. He told her about the sunsets over the mountains, the smell of fresh earth after rain, and the quiet satisfaction of completing a day's work. The woman listened with interest, occasionally asking questions and marveling at the simplicity and rhythm of his life. To her, it must have seemed a world apart from the constant struggle she had known. In turn, she shared more about her people, the traditions she had grown up with, and the knowledge passed down through generations. She spoke of plants and herbs that could heal, of the signs in nature that foretold weather changes, and of the ways to read tracks in snow or sand to understand who had passed by. John was fascinated. The knowledge she carried was practical and profound, rooted in centuries of observation and experience. He realized that she had not only survived, she had mastered the world around her in ways that most people could never hope to understand. Despite the calm of the cabin, there was an undercurrent of tension. John knew that the world outside was still dangerous, that the wilderness held threats both natural and human. Strangers could be dangerous, and the history of conflict between settlers and the Apache people was never far from anyone's mind in this region. Yet he found himself feeling more confident, more trusting, because he could see her honesty, her intelligence, and the careful way she carried herself. She was not a person to be feared, but a person to be respected. As afternoon approached, John went outside to check the fences and the cattle again, the woman following him at a safe distance. She moved carefully through the snow, her eyes scanning the landscape with sharp awareness. It was clear that she was attuned to the environment in a way that John could only admire. She noticed small signs that he would have overlooked: a faint track in the snow, the subtle bending of a branch, the way the wind carried sound across the open plains. Her knowledge of the land was extraordinary, and John realized that he could learn much from her if he were willing to listen. When they returned to the cabin, the woman helped gather firewood and prepare a simple stew. There was a quiet camaraderie in their shared work, a sense of mutual respect that grew stronger with each passing hour. They spoke little, but their movements and glances communicated understanding. John was struck by how someone so young could have such a presence, a calm confidence tempered by humility and experience. It was a reminder to him that true strength often came quietly, without boast or display, and that the people who had faced the greatest challenges often carried the deepest wisdom. As evening fell, the snow outside began to reflect the soft colors of the sunset, painting the landscape in shades of gold and pink. The woman sat near the fire, looking out the window, her hands folded over her knees. John joined her, offering a small smile. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" he said. She nodded, her eyes reflecting the warm glow of the fire. "Yes," she said softly. "Even in the harshest places, there is beauty. You just have to look for it." John realized that her words carried more than a simple observation. They were a reflection of her life, of the way she had learned to find hope and meaning even in the most difficult circumstances. As night approached, the woman shared another part of her story, this time about the dangers she had faced. She spoke of wolves, of harsh storms, and of the constant uncertainty that came with traveling alone. Yet she did not speak with fear, but with matter-of-fact acceptance. She had survived because she had learned to respect the world, to understand its rhythms, and to act with caution and intelligence. John was impressed by her calm and pragmatic approach to life. It was a sharp contrast to the fear and worry he had felt the first night they met. The conversation turned to the future. John asked gently, "What will you do now? Where will you go?" She paused, considering her words carefully. "I must keep moving," she said. "There are people I care for, places I need to reach, but I will not forget what you have done for me. You have given me warmth and safety when I had none." John nodded, feeling a mix of pride and humility. He had helped her, but in doing so, he had also been given the gift of witnessing someone's strength and resilience firsthand. As the night deepened, they prepared for sleep. The fire burned low, casting dancing shadows across the cabin walls. The woman arranged her blankets near the warmth, and John made sure she was comfortable before settling into his own corner. Before sleep claimed them both, she turned to him and whispered, "Thank you for believing in me when others might not have." John smiled softly. "You've shown me what courage really looks like," he said. Her eyes met his, and in that brief moment, a deep understanding passed between them. It was a connection formed not from words alone, but from shared experience, respect, and mutual trust. Outside, the winter night stretched across the mountains and valleys, silent and still. The snow reflected the faint light of the moon, creating a quiet, magical landscape. Inside the cabin, two people who had been strangers just days ago now shared a bond built on kindness, trust, and the understanding of one another's struggles. John knew that this encounter would remain with him forever, a reminder of the power of compassion and the strength of the human spirit. In the darkness, the woman drifted into sleep, her breathing steady and calm. John watched her for a moment, reflecting on how far she had come, both literally and figuratively. He understood that the challenges she had faced had shaped her into someone remarkable, someone whose life had been marked by hardship, yet also by incredible resilience, intelligence, and courage. And he felt privileged to have witnessed even a small part of her journey. The night passed peacefully. The storm was over, but its memory lingered in the snow-covered landscape. For John, the encounter had changed something fundamental. He had opened his home to a stranger, taken a risk, and in doing so had discovered the depth of human strength and the unexpected rewards of trust and compassion. For the woman, the cabin had been more than just shelter. It had been a rare moment of safety, warmth, and acknowledgement of her worth as a person. As the first light of morning touched the snow once again, both of them felt a sense of quiet anticipation. They knew that their paths would soon diverge, but the experience had left an indelible mark on each of them. They had learned from one another, shared moments of humanity in a harsh world, and discovered the power of empathy and courage. And even as the wind whispered through the mountains, carrying the chill of winter across the land, the warmth of their connection remained, a small but enduring flame in a cold and uncertain world. The next morning, the sun rose slowly over the snow-covered mountains, casting a gentle glow across the frozen land. The cabin was quiet, filled only with the soft crackle of the fire and the distant sound of wind moving through the trees. John had woken early, as was his habit, and quietly stoked the fire to ensure the warmth remained steady. The woman had already risen, tending to the blankets and the small supplies they had. She moved with quiet confidence, her movements precise and deliberate, as though every action had a purpose. John watched her for a moment, noting how calm and composed she appeared despite the hardships she had faced. The journey she had undertaken had clearly left its mark, yet it had not diminished her spirit. She was strong in ways that were not immediately obvious, strength of mind, of endurance, and of will. He admired her for it, realizing that courage could take many forms, and hers was the kind that spoke quietly but powerfully. As they settled into a routine for the morning, John prepared a simple breakfast of porridge and warm tea. The woman accepted the food gratefully, eating slowly and carefully, savoring each bite. She had been through so much, yet she carried herself with a quiet dignity that impressed John. It was clear that she was not someone who expected charity or pity. She was someone who had earned survival through her own efforts, and now, in this moment of respite, she simply accepted kindness. After breakfast, the woman began to speak about the journey that had brought her to the cabin in more detail. She described the harsh conditions she had endured: freezing nights, snow-covered trails, and the constant need to find food and water. Her voice was steady, almost matter-of-fact, yet there was a deep undercurrent of strength and determination in her words. John listened intently, realizing that her survival had required not only physical endurance but also intelligence, careful planning, and courage. "You've been through so much," John said quietly. "It's hard to imagine facing all of that alone." She looked at him, her eyes calm and thoughtful. "I had to," she replied. "There was no one else. I learned quickly that the world is not always kind, but it gives those who are careful and strong a chance to survive." Her words carried a quiet wisdom, the kind that only comes from facing challenges head-on and learning from each experience. John felt a growing respect for her, recognizing that her strength was not loud or boastful but quiet, steady, and resilient. As the day progressed, John noticed subtle signs that the woman was not only resourceful but also highly intelligent and observant. She pointed out edible plants and herbs that could be used for food or medicine, explained how to read tracks in the snow, and even demonstrated ways to find water sources hidden beneath the frozen landscape. John was fascinated. The knowledge she carried was not only practical but also remarkable in its depth and detail. It was clear that her survival had depended on understanding the world around her, and that understanding was now being shared with him. There was a moment when she paused, looking at John with a serious expression. "I want to show you something," she said quietly. "Something that has helped me survive, something I hope will help you as well." John's curiosity was piqued. He followed her as she moved to a corner of the cabin and carefully laid out a small bundle. Inside were sketches and notes, maps of hidden water sources, locations of medicinal plants, and tips for navigating the terrain safely. "This knowledge has kept my people alive for generations," she explained. "It is not just for me. I want to share it with someone who can use it wisely." John felt a mixture of awe and gratitude. The woman's gift was far greater than he had expected. It was not gold or treasure, but something far more valuable, knowledge and wisdom that could save lives, including his own. He realized that her reward was not something material, but something that reflected her respect, trust, and hope for the future. They spent the afternoon studying the maps and notes together. John asked questions, eager to understand, and she explained patiently, making sure he grasped the details. The process was slow and careful, but John found it deeply engaging. He marveled at her ability to combine observation, experience, and tradition into practical knowledge that could guide anyone through the wilderness. Each lesson she shared was a reminder of the importance of patience, attention, and respect for the world around them. As evening approached, a quiet reflection settled over the cabin. John realized that he had learned more in a single day from this woman than he had in years of working the land. Her insights were not only practical but also deeply philosophical. She spoke of the balance between humans and nature, of the need to respect the world rather than dominate it, and of the strength that comes from endurance and careful planning. Her words resonated with him, opening his mind to a perspective he had rarely considered in his daily life. The sun began to set, casting a warm glow through the windows. The woman sat near the fire, her hands folded over the bundle of notes and sketches. She looked at John and said softly, "I trust you. You have shown kindness and patience. You will use this knowledge wisely, won't you?" John nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility. "I promise," he replied. "I will honor your gift and use it carefully." There was a moment of silence as they both considered the significance of this exchange. Trust had been given, and it was a rare and precious thing. As night fell, the cabin was filled with the warmth of the fire and the quiet strength of shared understanding. The woman prepared her blanket near the hearth, and John made sure she was comfortable before settling into his own corner. Before sleep took them, she spoke one last time, her voice gentle but firm. "Remember, the world can be harsh, but it can also be kind. You must always pay attention, respect the land, and trust those who show you their heart." John listened carefully, recognizing the truth in her words. They were lessons not only for survival but for life itself. The night was peaceful. Outside, the wind whispered through the mountains, carrying the cold across the snow-covered land. Inside, there was warmth, safety, and a profound sense of connection. John reflected on the day and realized that he had not only given her shelter, but had received something far greater in return. The woman's wisdom, trust, and courage had enriched his life in ways he could not fully express. He felt a quiet gratitude for having met her, for having witnessed her strength, and for having shared even a brief part of her journey. As the hours passed, sleep finally claimed them both. The fire burned low, casting soft shadows across the walls of the cabin. Outside, the world was silent, covered in a blanket of snow, but inside there was a sense of life, of hope, and of the enduring power of trust and human connection. John knew that when morning came, their paths might begin to diverge, but the lessons of this day and the bond they had formed would remain with him forever. The woman's presence in the cabin had transformed the ordinary into something extraordinary. It was more than survival. It was a meeting of minds, a sharing of knowledge, and the beginning of an unspoken promise that kindness and trust could change lives. John realized that his willingness to help had been rewarded in a way he could never have imagined. It was a reminder that sometimes the greatest gifts are not tangible, but found in the wisdom, courage, and heart of another human being. Even as the night deepened, John felt a sense of peace. He knew that the woman's journey would continue, that she would face challenges and adventures far beyond what he could foresee. But he also knew that she had left a part of herself with him, a spark of knowledge, trust, and human connection that would guide him for years to come. In a world that could often be harsh and unforgiving, moments like these were rare and precious, a reminder that courage, wisdom, and compassion could light the way even in the coldest, darkest nights. By the time the first light of dawn touched the snow again, John and the woman were awake. The cabin felt alive with possibility, with the knowledge that what had been shared would not be forgotten. She prepared to continue her journey, but the bond they had formed would endure. The maps, the notes, and the stories she had entrusted to him were more than a reward. They were a legacy of survival, wisdom, and trust that he would carry with him always. As she left the cabin, the woman turned to John one last time. "Thank you," she said simply. "Not just for the shelter, but for believing in me, for trusting me, for listening. You have given me more than warmth. You have given me hope." John watched her disappear into the snowy landscape, feeling a mixture of awe and gratitude. The mountains rose around her like silent guardians, and John knew that her path was filled with challenges, but also with the strength and wisdom to overcome them. As he returned to the cabin, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The day had been extraordinary, not because of the snow or the cold, but because of the connection he had shared with someone so remarkable. He had witnessed courage, resilience, and wisdom firsthand, and in doing so, he had been changed. The warmth of the fire and the quiet comfort of the cabin were secondary to the lessons he had learned from the woman, the lessons of trust, endurance, and the power of kindness. That night, John sat by the fire long after the cabin had quieted. He reflected on the woman's words, her courage, and her generosity. He realized that the greatest rewards in life were often the intangible ones, the trust of another person, the sharing of knowledge, and the bonds formed through compassion. The maps and notes she had left were valuable, but the true gift was the understanding she had shared, the knowledge that courage and kindness could guide one through even the harshest winters of life. The morning sun rose over the snow-covered mountains, casting soft golden light. Across the cabin and the surrounding landscape, the world outside was quiet, the crisp winter air filled only with the gentle sound of frost-laden trees swaying in the breeze. John had been awake for some time, quietly stoking the fire and preparing the small cabin for the day. Today felt different, heavier in a way, as though the events of the past few days were building toward a turning point. The woman was already awake, moving quietly around the cabin. Her presence had become familiar and comforting, yet John knew that soon she would have to continue her journey. There was a sense of anticipation, a quiet understanding between them that the time together was drawing to a close. Despite the looming farewell, neither spoke of it directly. Instead, they focused on the morning tasks, preparing food, tending to the fire, and gathering supplies. John observed her carefully, noticing how self-reliant and capable she remained even after all she had endured. She moved with purpose and confidence, carrying herself with the quiet dignity of someone who had survived countless challenges. He realized that the woman's strength was not just in her ability to endure, but in her wisdom, her careful observation of the world, and her understanding of how to navigate it safely. She had faced dangers he could only imagine, yet she bore herself with calm assurance. After breakfast, they sat together near the fire. John carefully watched her as she prepared her few belongings for the journey ahead. There was a sense of solemnity in the air, a recognition that their time together had been meaningful. The woman looked at him, her eyes reflecting a mixture of gratitude and quiet resolve. "I must continue," she said softly. "There are people I need to find, places I must reach, but I will not forget you, John. You have given me more than shelter, you have given me trust and hope." John nodded, understanding the significance of her words. "You have taught me more than I could have imagined," he said. "Not just about survival, but about courage, patience, and understanding. Your presence here has been a gift." The woman smiled faintly, a mixture of humility and pride in her expression. She had survived for so long on her own, yet here she was, acknowledging the connection that had formed between them. It was a rare and precious thing, a bond forged in trust, respect, and shared humanity. Before she left, she handed him the bundle of notes and sketches she had shared the previous day. "This is for you," she said. "Use it wisely. It is not just maps and instructions. It is knowledge that has kept my people alive for generations. I trust that you will honor it." John accepted the bundle carefully, feeling the weight of its importance. He understood that the true reward she had offered was not wealth or material gain, but the gift of wisdom and the trust she had placed in him. As she stepped outside into the crisp morning air, the snow crunching beneath her feet, John felt a mixture of admiration and sadness. He had grown attached to her presence, to the quiet companionship they had shared. Yet he also knew that her journey was hers to continue, and that the world beyond the cabin was where she belonged. He watched as she moved confidently through the snow, her figure small but determined against the vast, white landscape. For a moment, John considered walking with her, offering to help her navigate the snow-covered trails. But he knew that she was capable and self-reliant. She had survived alone for so long, relying on her intelligence, skill, and courage. To walk with her would be unnecessary and perhaps even intrusive. Instead, he stood at the cabin door, watching silently, offering his support through presence alone. The woman paused briefly, turning to look back at him. Her eyes met his, and in that moment there was a profound understanding between them. Words were unnecessary. They had shared experiences, trust, and wisdom that could not be captured in conversation alone. She nodded once, a simple gesture filled with meaning, before continuing on her path through the snow. John watched her go, feeling a deep sense of respect and admiration. As she disappeared into the distance, John returned to the cabin, reflecting on the past few days. The encounter had changed him in ways he had not anticipated. He realized that acts of kindness and trust, even small ones, could have far-reaching effects. By opening his home and offering warmth, he had not only helped someone in need, but had also been given a gift in return: the chance to witness courage, resilience, and wisdom firsthand. The rest of the day passed quietly. John tended to the cabin and his animals, but his thoughts frequently returned to the woman and the lessons she had shared. He studied the notes and maps carefully, recognizing their practical value, but also appreciating the deeper wisdom they represented. She had shown him how to read the land, observe nature, and understand the world in ways he had never considered. Her knowledge was a reminder that the world held lessons for those willing to see, listen, and learn. In the evening, John sat by the fire, reflecting on the significance of the encounter. He realized that the true impact of the woman's presence was not just the survival knowledge she had shared, but the example she had set. She had faced adversity with courage, patience, and intelligence. She had trusted him despite being a stranger, and in return, he had learned to trust her and see the world from a broader perspective. The experience had changed him, opening his mind to the power of empathy, understanding, and human connection. As night fell, the snow outside glimmered under the pale light of the moon. The world was silent and still, but John felt a warmth inside that had little to do with the fire. He understood that the bond formed between them was enduring, a reminder that even brief encounters could leave lasting impressions. The woman had come into his life unexpectedly, yet she had left a mark that would stay with him forever. Days turned into weeks, and John continued his work on the ranch. Yet, the lessons he had learned from the woman remained with him. He applied her knowledge of the land and natural signs, finding hidden water sources, identifying useful plants, and navigating the wilderness with greater confidence. But more importantly, he carried with him the understanding that trust, kindness, and courage were as valuable as any practical skill. Occasionally, John would think of the woman, wondering where she was and how her journey was progressing. He hoped she had found the people she sought and that her path was filled with safety and success. Though they were apart, the memory of her presence, her words, and the lessons she had imparted remained vivid. It was a reminder that some connections, though brief, could shape a person's life in profound ways. John shared the knowledge he had received with a few trusted neighbors, carefully passing along practical advice about surviving in the harsh wilderness. He spoke of the importance of observing nature, respecting the land, and preparing wisely for the challenges of winter. He never revealed the woman's identity out of respect for her privacy, but he ensured that her wisdom reached others who could benefit from it. In this way, her gift of knowledge continued to have an impact far beyond the walls of the small cabin. As seasons changed, John often reflected on the winter when the woman had arrived. The memory of her courage, intelligence, and kindness remained a guiding influence in his life. He realized that the true value of the encounter had not been the immediate help he had provided, but the lessons of trust, endurance, and empathy that had been exchanged. The experience had taught him that even in a harsh and unpredictable world, humanity could shine brightly through small acts of kindness. Years later, John would tell the story to those who would listen, not to boast of his actions, but to share the lessons learned. He spoke of a woman who had arrived at his cabin one winter night, shivering and alone, yet full of wisdom, courage, and strength. He recounted how her knowledge had guided him, how her trust had inspired him, and how the bond they had formed, though brief, had left a lasting impact. The story became a lesson for others, a reminder that compassion and understanding could bridge gaps, teach valuable lessons, and leave enduring legacies. Even as time passed, John never forgot her. The woman had disappeared into the vast wilderness, continuing her journey, carrying her resilience, courage, and wisdom wherever she went. Yet in his heart she remained, a symbol of strength, trust, and the power of human connection. Every winter, as the snow fell and the wind howled across the mountains, he remembered the night she had arrived at his door, seeking warmth and shelter. He remembered the lessons she had shared and the trust she had placed in him, and he felt gratitude for the way her presence had transformed his understanding of the world and of people. In the end, the true reward of that winter was not in material wealth or recognition, but in the shared experience of humanity. The woman had arrived in need, and John had responded with kindness. In return, he had received wisdom, perspective, and a lasting bond that shaped his life forever. It was a reminder that acts of compassion, no matter how small, could leave profound impacts, teaching lessons that endure far beyond the moment. And so, life on the ranch continued. The seasons changed, the cattle roamed, and the wind whispered through the mountains. But John carried with him the memory of that extraordinary winter, the woman who had appeared at his cabin, the trust she had given, and the lessons she had imparted. Her courage and wisdom remained with him, a guiding light through all the challenges that life brought. And in the quiet moments by the fire, he would smile, remembering the extraordinary gift of human connection, trust, and kindness that had forever changed his life.